Novel Navigator. Chapter 1, Swordsmanship Instruction. In the Sword Marquis Mansion, Bashui Commandery, Tianyang Province in the Tianzong Dynasty. Meng-er, your sword can be faster and more powerful. Nice, that time was better. Jian Meng-er, a beautiful young girl wearing snow-white clothes, was practicing her swordsmanship diligently in the courtyard. The speed of her sword was fast. The man standing beside her and giving her advice was a young boy wearing black called Jian Wushuang. Judging by their appearance, both of them were only about 15 or 16 years old. But Jian Wushuang could already point out her shortcomings one by one with his perceptive gaze. After finishing a complete sword art, Jian Meng-er stood up, sheathing her sword. She smiled and went over to Jian Wushuang. "Bro Wushuang, what do you think of my swordsmanship?" Jian Meng-er asked. Aurora sword art requires high speed. If someone could finish the whole sword art within 40 breaths worth of time, they would be at the profound level. You just finished it within 38 breaths of time. That's quite good, Jian Wushuang said. Thanks for your help, without you I could not have reached the profound level in this short period of 2 months, Jian Meng-er said. Jian Wushuang shook his head secretly. He knew that his instruction was part of it, but what was more important was that Jian Meng-er herself had great talent in the sword. In the Sword Marquis Mansion, where most people paid attention to practicing swordsmanship, perhaps Jian Meng-er was the one with the highest talent in swordsmanship, apart from himself. Bro Wushuang, how long does it take you to finish the Aurora sword arts? Within 30 breaths. Jian Meng-er asked. Within 30 breaths. Jian Wushuang smiled but did not answer her. Anyone who finished set of Aurora sword arts within 30 breaths worth of time would have reached the profound level. However, he could finish the whole set in 23 breaths of time if he went all out. It meant that he had reached great heights long ago. With your talent in swordsmanship, you must finish it in less than 30 breaths, except, Jian Meng-er looked at Jian Wushuang with hesitation and sorrow in her eyes. Jian Wushuang certainly knew what she implied. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll become a warrior soon." Really? Jian Meng-er was doubtful. After all, he had said that 4 years ago. Jian Wushuang was the lineal disciple of the Sword Marquis Mansion. His father was the Sword Pavilion Master and he had been recognized as the most powerful in Sword Marquis Mansion. Jian Wushuang grew up under his father's cultivation and instruction. Thanks to his father, he was born into a position of eminence and was absolutely one of the top young generation disciples in the Sword Marquis Mansion. However, all that changed greatly 4 years ago when he was 12 years old. During that year, his father had left to travel, but thereafter, he had not been heard from and no one knew where he was. Misfortune never comes alone. It was also in that year when he should have started to cultivate spiritual power, which was essential for him to become a warrior. However, he found that he could not cultivate spiritual power no matter how hard he tried. Failing to cultivate spiritual power was a nightmare for a warrior. It should be known that to practice martial arts, a warrior needed to absorb spirit from heaven and earth and then to cultivate spiritual power in his body. Spiritual power was fundamental to every warrior. It was impossible for one to be a warrior if one could not cultivate spiritual power. Such a person would be looked down as trash in the Sword Marquis Mansion, where strength was everything. During the last 4 years, Jian Wushuang had never given up. Instead, he had continued to work hard to become a real warrior. He hoped to succeed his father's seat and be given charge of the Sword Pavilion one day. But reality was cruel. Although Jian Wushuang could not cultivate spiritual power, his talent in swordsmanship was amazing. He practiced swordsmanship under his father's instruction since he was young. Because of his father's status and his great talent, he remembered sword arts quickly and could fully comprehend them after only being taught once. Though he was young, there was no doubt that he was number one in terms of swordsmanship. But it meant nothing to practice swordsmanship without spiritual power. It's real this time, Jian Wushuang said confidently. Well. Jian Meng'er smiled, but did not take it seriously. Meng'er, Wushuang. A kindly middle-aged man walked into the courtyard. Father, Jian Meng'er called out. Uncle Lan, Jian Wushuang called out after. This middle-aged man was Jian Meng'er's father, the great elder of the Red Martial Hall in the Sword Marquee Mansion, Jian Lan. Wushuang, you have instructed Meng'er in swordsmanship all day. That's very kind of you, Jian Lan smiled and said. It's nothing, Jian Wushuang shook his head and said, Uncle Lan, it's getting late. I'd better be off. Okay. Jian Lan and Jian Meng'er watched Jian Wushuang leave. As Jian Wushuang disappeared from sight, the mild look on Jian Lan vanished. Meng'er, how much progress have you made? Jian Lan asked her in a low and deep voice. In Aurora sword art, I have reached the profound level, Jian Meng'er said with a stern look. Great. Jian Lan held his hands with exultation on his face. For almost 4 years, you have been with that loser every day in order for him to teach you swordsmanship. After 4 years of suffering, you finally get something in return. Now you have learned all 18 first-class sword arts of the sword pavilion to the profound level. The next step is to carry out our plan. Father, are you sure that we can do it? Jian Meng'er frowned and asked, as her eyes looked cold and merciless. Those who are involved in a major event do not worry about trifles. Jian Ian's eyes became cold and sharp again. All things depend on what happens tomorrow. Jian Wushuang went back to his own courtyard. After eating something quickly, he sat cross-legged on the bed. When I told Meng'er today that I would become a real warrior soon, she didn't believe me. Jian Wushuang smiled and his right hand involuntarily touched his lower abdomen. In his abdomen, a grey stone bead, which was the size of a baby's fist, had existed since he was born and no one knew where it came from. But it was the chief reason which prevented him from becoming a real warrior. Others thought that Jian Wushuang was a good-for-nothing who could not cultivate any spiritual power. Actually, only he himself knew that it was not true. The 108 meridians in his body were unblocked a long time ago. It was quite easy for him to cultivate spiritual power. However, the spirit that he cultivated from the heaven and earth was totally absorbed by the grey stone bead in his abdomen before it could turn into spiritual power. In other words, all the spirit that he cultivated from nature became food for the grey stone bead. While the grey stone was growing constantly, Jian Wushuang found that the bead was like a bottomless pit that had no limit to its volume. In the last 4 years, he had been cultivating spirit every day to fill the grey stone bead up as fast as possible, so that the bead would stop absorbing his spiritual energy, which would allow him to cultivate spiritual power in his body and become a warrior. Yesterday, he found that the grey stone bead would soon be saturated. By today, the grey stone bead would reach its limit. Then he could cultivate spiritual power in his body. Let me get started. Jian Wushuang started his daily cultivation and awaited the changes. Things went as he had expected. The grey stone bead in his body reached its ultimate limit while more and more spirit energy was absorbed. The grey stone bead suddenly spun in his body and the rotation was getting faster and faster, while it was getting smaller and smaller. Unexpectedly, the grey stone bead, which had existed in Jian Wushuang's body for such a long time, completely vanished with a tremble. It's gone. The bead disappeared, didn't it? A burst of great joy came into Jian Wushuang's eyes for 1 second, but the next moment, he suddenly opened his eyes wide. A rush of information flew into his mind. Heavenly creation skill. Form a supreme martial art with the technique of creation from heaven and earth. Chapter 2, Forming a supreme martial art with the technique of absorbing essence from the heaven and earth. Heavenly creation skill. Form a supreme martial art with the technique of creation from heaven and earth. Jian Wushuang opened his eyes and they were full of astonishment. Cultivation method. Is there one more cultivation method occurring in my mind? Jian Wushuang was startled at first, but at the next moment, he understood that the cultivation method was related to the gray stone bead. Jian Wushuang was not a stranger to cultivation methods. In the Sword Marquee Mansion, disciples who condensed spiritual power could pick any appropriate cultivation method at the cultivation pavilion by themselves. Although there were thousands of cultivation methods in this world, he had never heard of any cultivation method that dared to name itself after cultivating from the heaven and earth like the heavenly creation skill. The gray stone bead was hidden inside me all this time and absorbed all of the spiritual power that I condensed for 4 years. It is so special that the bead disappeared and left a cultivation method for me. This must be extraordinary. Jian Wushuang carefully looked through the heavenly creation skill at once. The path of martial arts is a fight against fate, to enable creation with the power of heaven and earth. The heavenly creation skill is divided into many realms, including the 9 heavens of the divine path, ultimate spiritual sea, supreme gold core realm, yin-yang breaking, venerable master, flying to the 9th heaven, and so on. Every realm defies the heavens and current conventions. Using martial arts based on the heavenly creation skill implies defying the heavens. Every step is out of the ordinary. Anyone who defies the heavens is nature's enemy, also known as a defiant cultivator. It was a few simple words, but they made Jian Wushuang freeze. Cultivating in defiance of the heavens. Deviant cultivation, he thought. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and slowly calmed down. Although it was just a brief introduction with several simple words, he could still see the outstanding differences of this cultivation method. In Jian Wushuang's understanding, for warriors generally, the way of martial arts began with the spirit path. The 7 steps of the spirit path, transforming a spiritual sea, formation of the gold core realm, yin-yang void realm, and then the legendary realm of divine transcendence were all realms of martial arts that were known to Jian Wushuang. However, the steps for cultivating the heavenly creation skill and its every realm were quite different from what he had known. Just in the beginning, one was the 7 steps of the spirit path, while the other was the 9 heavens of the divine path. One only had 7 levels, but the other had a full 9 levels. This completely went against cultivating conventions. Its division of realms violated the natural order and convention, so it was no wonder that people who cultivated this cultivation method were destined to defy the heavens. This was a real heaven-defying cultivation method. Cultivating this method meant going against the natural order. Deviant cultivation. Jian Wushuang hunkered on the bed, but at the moment his mood was extremely complex. Jian Wushuang was shocked and afraid, but the excitement in his heart was hard to hide. Such a heaven-defying cultivation method was hiding inside the gray stone bead. What should I do? A heaven-defying cultivation method is in front of me, but I don't know whether I should cultivate it or not. Jian Wushuang held his hands tightly. However, this hesitation only remained for a moment, and then he quickly made a decision. What's wrong with deviant cultivation? As the heavenly creation skill says, in fact, the way of martial arts is fighting against fate and creation with the heaven and earth. Warriors are not tolerated by heaven and earth. In that case, why shouldn't my cultivation defy the heavens? Jian Wushuang really could not find any reason to stop him from cultivating the heavenly creation skill. Moreover, he had been tortured by the gray stone bead for 4 years, and now that the bead finally compensated him with such a cultivation method. If he did not cultivate it, he would not be satisfied because of the grievances he had suffered for 4 years. No longer hesitant, Jian Wushuang immediately began to cultivate this method according to the instructions in the heavenly creation skill. The vast spiritual power of heaven and earth continuously flooded into his body, and his 108 meridians absorbed it crazily. The power ran in his body according to a unique path. After a large circle of vital energy, this power gathered toward Jian Wushuang's danshan. The night passed quickly. Early the next morning, while it was still dark, before sunrise, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes slowly, while hunkered on his bed. He had cultivated the whole night. Looking at his right palm, he saw a ray of spiritual power emerging. His eyes could not help shining in excitement. The first heaven of the divine path. After one night of cultivation, not only had he condensed the first ray of spiritual power, but his danshan had stored more power. In terms of martial arts cultivating, as long as a person could condense spiritual power, even a part of it, he would become a true warrior. The heavenly creation skill is really extraordinary. After only one night, I have stored so much spiritual power in my body. This cultivating speed is much faster than that in the sword marquee mansion. Moreover, I feel that the strength I can release is much stronger than the first step of the spirit path. Jian Wushuang shook his arms and felt his strength at the moment. The first heaven of the divine path was much the same as the first step of the spirit path for normal warriors, but there was an obvious difference in strength. After reaching the first heaven of the divine path, the strength Jian Wushuang could unleash was unquestionably stronger than warriors reaching the first step of the spirit path. The beginning of the heavenly creation skill was the 9 heavens of the divine path, which included 9 levels. The strength that I can release is stronger than ordinary warriors from the first step of the spirit path. Does it mean that when I reach the 7th heaven of the divine path, I can easily outclass warriors from the peak of the 7th step of the spirit path? Therefore, when I arrive at the 9th heaven of the divine path, which is the peak of the divine path, the strength I can use will be more powerful than experts in the spiritual sea realm. A flicker of fear passed through his eyes. Amazing. The heavenly creation skill is too strong. Its cultivation speed was much faster than ordinary methods. The key was that its every step would defy the heavens. Each realm could go against the natural order and conventions. In addition, the cultivation method contained a secret method. Soul-devouring secret skill. Jian Wushuang read to himself. The soul-devouring secret skill was extremely aggressive and heaven-defying. It was more a forbidden skill rather than secret method. It belonged to the kind that would kill 1,000 enemies at the price of sacrificing 800 soldiers from one's own side. Anyway, just seeing the introduction to this secret method, he could not help fearing it. He did not intend to cultivate the secret method right now. After he improved his cultivation for a while, he could study it more carefully. Warrior. I, Jian Wushuang, have finally become a real warrior. His heart roared crazily because he had suffered all kinds of humiliation for 4 years. Now he finally condensed his own spiritual power and became a real warrior. That made him want to loudly scream out. He was Jian Wushuang, with a sword in hand, no one is his match. He was absolutely not trash. After a simple wash, Jian Wushuang went outside immediately. He could not wait to tell Jian Meng'er the news that he had become a warrior. He wanted to give her a surprise. Meng'er, I told you that I would definitely become a warrior. Not only that, but in the future, I would become as strong as my father. I will become the top warrior in Sword Marquee Mansion, with the triple kill sword in hand, and in charge of the sword pavilion. He had anticipation in his heart. His father had not been heard from since 4 years ago, after which he had made the decision. He hoped one day that he would become strong enough to succeed his father's position and take charge of the sword pavilion. This was the greatest wish of his life. He could not condense spiritual power before, so he was far from this dream, but now it was totally different. Have you heard the news that just now, Jian Lan, the great elder of Red Martial Hall, united the entire hall to make a demand to the mansion master to nominate his daughter, Jian Meng'er, as the sword pavilion master and to take charge of the sword pavilion. Jian Wushuang stopped at once. Chapter 3, A Thunderclap. Is it true that Uncle Lan, in alliance with Red Martial Hall, asked the mansion master to have Meng'er become the sword pavilion master so that she can take charge of sword pavilion? Is it a joke? Jian Wushuang laughed and didn't take it seriously. After all, for these 4 years, he stayed with Jian Meng'er almost every day, and Jian Lan had always been kind and taken particular care of him. As a result, they got along well with each other. Jian Wushuang even treated them like his family, keeping no secrets from them. His greatest wish, which was to take charge of the sword pavilion, had been known to them, both Jian Lan and Jian Meng'er. In addition, it had been a tradition that the sword pavilion master could only be selected from the sword pavilion. And Jian Meng'er, like her father, was committed to Red Martial Hall. In Sword Marquee Mansion, Sword Pavilion and Red Martial Hall belonged to two different factions, which competed for dominance. Sword Marquee Mansion, in its early days, concentrated on intensive research in swordsmanship, which can be inferred from the surname, Jian, of each clansman. However, with its gradual prosperity and development, juniors of the Marquee Mansion also branched into other weapons. This was especially if they were more gifted in them than in swordsmanship. Later, there were more and more such juniors, eventually leading to the formation of Red Martial Hall. The existence of these two factions never led to open conflict, though there was always an undercurrent of rivalry. Now the relationship between them was especially acrimonious. Since Jian Meng'er, the daughter of the great elder of Red Martial Hall, was their heir, how could she take charge of Sword Pavilion? Jian Wushuang did not take it seriously at first, thinking that the man was just kidding. But he heard further news after he took just a few steps. I heard that too. Jian Lan, the head of Red Martial Hall, together with the alchemists of Pill Refining Room, went to the mansion master and requested that he approve Jian Meng'er to take charge of the Sword Pavilion. This was strongly opposed by Sword Pavilion. However, they have had little influence since Jian Nantian, the Sword Pavilion master, disappeared. Their opposition was overruled. Finally, the mansion master, although reluctant, promised to have Jian Meng'er take charge of Sword Pavilion as long as she was qualified to be the Sword Pavilion master. What standards needed to be satisfied to become the Sword Pavilion master? In Sword Marquee Mansion, the Sword Pavilion master is only inferior to the mansion master. They have a high status, which is difficult to reach. Therefore, Sword Pavilion has always insisted on a set of minimum requirements for its master. To be the Sword Pavilion master, the very first requirement is to gain extremely high attainments in sword principles and be proficient in all 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion. First-class sword arts? All 18 of them? There were only exclamations that remained. In Sword Marquee Mansion, normal disciples only had access to third-class or second-class sword arts, while first-class sword arts were available for those talented disciples who were core members or elite members. Today in the Sword Pavilion, there were less than 10 disciples who were qualified to learn first-class sword arts, and even if possible, they could only learn 1 or 2 first-class sword arts at most. As for the 18 first-class sword arts, even a core disciple of Sword Pavilion was not eligible to learn all of them, let alone a disciple of Red Martial Hall. It is totally impossible for Jian Meng'er to satisfy the standard, someone said confidently. Not exactly, Jian Meng'er did it. Today, under the watchful eyes of the mansion master and Sword Pavilion elders, she carried out all 18 first-class sword arts, with an incredible display of proficiency at the profound level. Excuse me? How could it be possible? How did she learn these sword arts? Everyone present was shocked. Jian Wushuang, however, standing there the entire time, was dumbfounded. 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion? Was he not the person who had taught Jian Meng'er those techniques? 4 years ago, it was Jian Meng'er who helped him get out of his dilemma when his father was missing and he could not condense spiritual power, which was a huge blow to him. Having been grateful to her, he stayed with Jian Meng'er almost every day. She was endowed with great talent in sword principle and was keen on sword wielding. However, there were no advanced sword arts in Red Martial Hall. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang, an innocent kid then, at 12 or 13, started to teach Jian Meng'er swordsmanship. Later, he even taught her sword arts from Sword Pavilion. 4 years have passed. In these 4 years, he taught each of the 18 first-class sword arts to Jian Wushuang. But today, due to his teaching, she could dream of taking charge of Sword Pavilion? To take charge of the Sword Pavilion was the greatest wish of his whole life. No, it's impossible. Wushuang would never do that. Jian Wushuang thought, shaking his head, reluctant to believe it. To take charge of Sword Pavilion, required tremendous quality and strength, besides proficiency in all 18 first-class sword arts, which was compulsory. The minimum strength requirement for a Sword Pavilion master was the ability to battle with each of the 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion for at least 20 movements, which Jian Wushuang did successfully. How could it be possible? I am well aware of the strength of the 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion, who have already reached spiritual sea realm long ago. It is said that Elder Hong, the strongest among them, has reached the exceptional spiritual sea realm, just 1 step away from the gold core realm. How could Jian Wushuang ever be able to get through 20 movements? We have looked down upon her all this time. She has always been quiet in the Marquis's mansion and seldom showed her strength, but today, during her battles with the 4 Sword Pavilion elders, everyone present was totally shocked by her strength. It was at the spiritual sea realm. More than that, she is at the profound spiritual sea realm. With 1 more level, she would be at the exceptional spiritual sea realm. Jian Wushuang. How could she step into the profound spiritual sea realm? I don't think it's possible for such a young, 16-year-old girl. Not only were those disciples who were having the discussion too astonished to utter a word, but Jian Wushuang was also totally dumbstruck. Wushuang, she reached the profound spiritual sea realm. Jian Wushuang thought with disbelief. Although he had been with Jian Wushuang every day for 4 years, she had never shown her strength. Jian Wushuang did not think much about that, thinking that Jian Wushuang was the same as other disciples in Marquis's mansion, who were at the 5th or 6th step of the spirit path at most. He never imagined she could reach spiritual sea realm, let alone the profound spiritual sea realm. How could a girl as young as 16 years old step into the profound spiritual sea realm? It had never happened in Sword Marquis Mansion over the last hundreds of years. Jian Wushuang, such a genius with super talent, has never appeared before in the hundreds of years of history of the Sword Marquis Mansion. She is so good at the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion that she has survived 20 movements of the 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion. As a result, Mansion Master gave his instant consent to Jian Wushuang that she could take charge of Sword Pavilion, making her the Sword Pavilion Master. In 2 months, there will be an annual Sword Marquis token battle in Sword Pavilion Mansion, which is when Jian Wushuang can prove her astounding strength in the presence of the strong experts in Bashui Commandery. Then, with everyone bearing witness, she will be awarded the title of Sword Pavilion Master. Amazing. It is really amazing that a 16-year-old girl has reached the profound spiritual sea realm. It won everyone's exclamations except for Jian Wushuang, who was standing by the side and turned pale at this news. Did Wushuang really reach the profound spiritual sea realm? Will she really take charge as the Sword Pavilion Master in 2 months? No. No way. I can't believe that. Clenching his fists, Jian Wushuang rushed to the courtyard of her residence as if he had gone mad. His heart was a mess. It can't be true. He could not believe it was true. It was known to all that Sword Pavilion belonged to their disciples, and since his father was the Sword Pavilion Master, he was the only heir. He remembered that his father had told him that only disciples from Sword Pavilion could take charge of it. And that was his lifelong dream. So how could he let others steal and destroy his dream? Chapter 4, Blood Oath. Jian Wushuang came to the courtyard where he had been practicing swordsmanship with Jian Wushuang every day. Normally, Jian Wushuang would have been waiting here already, but today, after Jian Wushuang arrived at the courtyard, he didn't see her in their usual spot. There was only Jian Lan, wearing a black robe. He stood with his hands behind his back and waited for him quietly. Jian Wushuang had a bad feeling. "Uncle Lan," Jian Wushuang called him as usual. "You're here?" Jian Lan turned. His usual mild face had changed completely into a cold and distant one. "You must have heard everything. Today the mansion master appointed Menger as the new sword pavilion master. After the sword marquee token battle, a succession ceremony will be hosted. By the way, the token representing the status of sword pavilion master is currently with you." Jian Wushuang was shocked. The token representing the sword pavilion master was the most powerful sword in Sword Marquee Mansion, triple kill sword. It had been brought back by a man, trusted by his father, not long after he disappeared. In the last 4 years, the sword had always been kept by him. It was the long sword on his back. "Hand it over," Jian Lan said. Both Jian Wushuang's body and heart shook. Looking at Jian Lan, he ground his teeth in rage and said in a low voice, "I want to see Menger." "Menger, what status does she have? You think you can meet with whomever you wish?" Jian Lan said with a sneer. "Unless I see her, I will not hand it over," Jian Wushuang said defiantly. Even at this moment, he still had some hope deep in his heart that all this had been Jian Ian's idea and that Jian Menger was being forced into it. "How dare you!" Jian Lan shouted. He was getting angry. "Father!" A beautiful girl dressed in white came out of the house slowly. "Jian Menger." "Menger." Jian Wushuang turned eagerly toward her. That one glance destroyed his last hope. He noticed that Jian Menger's eyes were cold and ruthless. Jian Wushuang suddenly realized that Jian Menger had not been forced. "You've been lying to me?" Jian Wushuang asked, staring at her. "Lying to you?" "No." Jian Menger shook her head. "I never promised you anything. Even though you taught me swordsmanship as I asked, I never forced you. It was a deal. You instructed me and I accompanied you for 4 years. It's fair." "Only a deal?" Jian Wushuang asked again with a wan smile. "You should know that the triple kill sword was sent back by a man trusted by my father. It may be the only clue to find him." "I know." Jian Menger nodded. "You also know that my greatest wish in life is to succeed my father and take charge of Sword Pavilion with the triple kill sword in hand one day, don't you?" Jian Wushuang continued to ask. "Yes." Jian Menger nodded again. "However, it is just a dream for you. It will never be realized. After all, you are trash who is incapable of cultivating spiritual power." "Trash?" Jian Wushuang couldn't stop laughing at himself. It was just early this very morning, that he had cultivated the heavenly creation skill and finally condensed some spiritual power. He had become a real warrior now. He could hardly wait to share this with her. Who would have thought she had been thinking he was trash the entire time? A pitiful person who couldn't cultivate spiritual power? "Jian Wushuang, things have happened. There is no need to haggle over this endlessly. It will only make you appear weaker. If you are not reconciled with what you have suffered, you can challenge me fairly. In this world, strength gives you power and rights. People take advantage of you when you are weak. Who can you blame for that?" Jian Menger said with indifference. "So that's it? Because I'm too weak?" Jian Wushuang said with a faint smile. However, the smile on his face was a sad one. "So, I have always been a fool. Ha ha, stupid. I am so stupid. I am the biggest fool in the world. I am an idiot." Jian Wushuang roared as if he was insane. Jian Lan and Jian Menger stood nearby and looked at him quietly without any mercy in their eyes. What she had said was the brutal truth. In this world, people survived according to the law of the jungle. Jian Wushuang laughed sadly. But in the meantime, his brain seemed to have been struck by thousands of thunderbolts simultaneously. His face was twisted and his eyes were complicated, first disbelief, then shock, and at last anger, almost to the point of insanity. Several seconds later, Jian Wushuang suddenly stopped laughing. When he looked up again, his eyes had returned to calmness. Both Jian Lan and Jian Meng'er noticed his transformation. They were quite astonished. However, they didn't notice the radical change Jian Wushuang had gone through in his inner heart in such a short time. The originally innocent and simple-minded Jian Wushuang was gone. Instead, the man who remained seemed to have experienced decades of vicissitudes in life. After taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang looked back at Jian Meng'er. The look was marrow-freezing and not at all tender. Jian Meng'er couldn't help feeling a chill under his intense gaze. These eyes, how cold they were. Like a venomous snake eyeing its prey. Jian Meng'er, you're right. Only the weak pray for pity. Experts prove themselves with strength. So. Jian Wushuang said in a cold voice. He pulled the triple kill sword from his back, raising it. Shua. The sharp sword edge scratched a bleeding wound on Jian Wushuang's palm. A burning pain shot through his hand while he clenched his bloody fist. Painful as it was, he gazed at Jian Meng'er and said. In 2 months, during the Sword Marquee token battle, the day when you will succeed the position of Sword Pavilion Master in public, I will challenge you. I swear I will make you all know that the Sword Pavilion, forever belongs to Sword Pavilion. It belongs to my father, belongs to me. It is impossible for anyone else to have a hand in it. I will kill everyone who attempts to encroach. Blood flowed along his arm slowly and dripped on the ground. His words sounded sonorous and forceful. As for the triple kill sword? Humph. Looking at the sword in his hand, Jian Wushuang sneered and said, You want it? Here you are. Jian Wushuang threw triple kill sword towards Jian Meng'er, then he turned and went straight outside. At the very moment, before he left the courtyard, Jian Wushuang stopped and said coldly. I will see you in 2 months. Wearing a slight frown and looking at Jian Wushuang's departure and lonely back in blank amazement, Jian Meng'er suddenly felt that the triple kill sword in her hand was extremely heavy. Humph. Trash who can't even condense spiritual power wants to challenge you in 2 months. He must be kidding. It would be better for him to become a real warrior within 2 months. Standing nearby, Jian Lan laughed in disdain. Hearing this, Jian Meng'er relaxed her furrowed brows. That's right. He is still trash who can't condense spiritual power. How dare he fight with me in 2 months? It is an absolute joke. Chapter 5, The Cultivation Room. Jian Wushuang went back to his courtyard alone and locked himself inside. Jian Meng'er, ha, ha, Jian Wushuang laughed at himself. He thought of these 4 years he had spent with her. Their time together had created wonderful memories for him, but now all these memories had become sharp thorns that caused him extreme pain. Weak. Yes, she's right. Ultimately, my strength is too weak. If I was stronger and more powerful than Jian Meng'er, then she would never dare to say words like that in front of me. With that strength, there is no hope for her in taking charge of Sword Pavilion. Strength, Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold. No one knew what a radical mental change he had gone through in just 1 day. No outsider can ever lay a finger on Sword Pavilion even for 1 day. In 2 months, I must defeat Jian Meng'er in a fair way before she officially succeeds to the position of Sword Pavilion Master. 2 months. He clenched his fists tightly. Maybe for others, it was impossible to cultivate from condensing spiritual power to Jian Meng'er's level, the profound spiritual sea realm, but Jian Wushuang was different. After all, he had cultivated the heavenly creation skill, a heaven-defying martial art. And since it was a heaven-defying cultivation method, he should be able to cultivate in defiance of the natural order. Sword Marquee Mansion was located within Bashui Prefecture, Tianyang Province of Tianzong Dynasty. It was one of the main powers within Bashui Prefecture, and it focused exclusively on sword principle. There were 2 factions in Sword Marquee Mansion, Sword Pavilion and Red Martial Hall. These two factions had fought both overtly and covertly, but Sword Pavilion had always prevailed. However, when Jian Nantian, the Sword Pavilion master, disappeared 4 years ago, Sword Pavilion lost its backbone. Its overall strength suffered a disastrous decline, and so did its right of speech. The Sword Pavilion was at an absolute disadvantage in the fight with Red Martial Hall. It was yesterday that the position of Sword Pavilion Master had been taken away by Jian Menger from Red Martial Hall. The Sword Pavilion. Dressed in white and with a common longsword on his back, Jian Wushuang walked up to the door of the Sword Pavilion. Looking at the two words Sword Pavilion at the top, his mood was extremely complex. He hesitated for a moment and then stepped into the Sword Pavilion. When Jian Wushuang appeared in the Sword Pavilion, many disciples who had been practicing swordsmanship could not help looking at him. Is that Jian Wushuang? Yes, it's him. He is a traitor. He taught many first-class sword arts from our Sword Pavilion to a person from the Red Martial Hall. How dare he come here? Alas! We cannot blame him. After all, he was cheated. And if Jian Menger takes charge of Sword Pavilion, he will suffer the most. Please stop talking like that. He is in pain. There was a lot of whispering in the Sword Pavilion. Most of the eyes upon him were full of mercy. The news that Jian Menger would take charge of Sword Pavilion had spread all over the Sword Marquee Mansion, so the news that she had mastered all 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion to profound level naturally had run through here. Generally speaking, these first-class sword arts could not be taught to outsiders. Even core disciples could only cultivate 1 or 2. So how had Jian Menger mastered all 18 first-class sword arts at the same time? The answer was obvious. Jian Wushuang had taught her. In the whole Sword Pavilion, only Jian Wushuang knew all 18 first-class sword arts. Because of his father's position, he had learned swordsmanship from childhood and his father had taught him these 18 techniques. The Sword Pavilion was full of murmuring and comments, but Jian Wushuang did not stop. He walked directly into the inner hall with an indifferent expression. Inside the hall, a gray-haired elder in a gray robe was looking through a thread-bound book, but when he saw Jian Wushuang coming in, he stopped, surprised. Young Pavilion Master. The gray-robed elder said in a constrained voice. Elder Hong. Jian Wushuang said humbly. His eyes were full of guilt. For years, the Sword Pavilion elders had exerted their utmost efforts for the Sword Pavilion. However, due to his stupidity, the position of Sword Pavilion Master had changed hands and was being taken charge of by a person from the Red Martial Hall. So Jian Wushuang felt guilty. This isn't your fault. You are too young and don't understand these schemes. We, the Sword Pavilion elders, are not going to blame you. Elder Hong saw the guilty look in Jian Wushuang's eyes and shook his head with a smile. If someone should be blamed, it should be Jian Lan and Jian Menger. Their means were too dishonorable. Especially that Jian Menger, I have met her several times. But I had never thought that she could hide her schemes so deeply. With such a mind at a young age, her future achievements will be great. It is not too bad that the Sword Pavilion has fallen into her hands. Sword Pavilion. Only disciples from the Sword Pavilion can take charge of it. Jian Wushuang said firmly. Elder Hong was startled for a moment, and then he could only shake his head helplessly. In the bottom of his heart, he was extremely reluctant to let Jian Menger take charge of Sword Pavilion, but now these things had happened. What could he do? He could only comfort himself. Elder Hong, I want to go inside the human-level cultivation room, Jian Wushuang said suddenly in a serious tone. The human-level cultivation room. Elder Hong was shocked. The human-level cultivation room was an exclusive secret chamber for cultivation in the Sword Pavilion. Besides the human-level cultivation room, there were the earth-level cultivating room and the heaven-level cultivating room. These 3 cultivation rooms could help to promote cultivation, but they also had some disadvantages. Few disciples came here to cultivate in them regularly. However, Jian Wushuang had not even condensed any spiritual power. What could he do in the human-level cultivation room? Although Elder Hong was puzzled, he nodded his head and said, "Come with me." Soon, Elder Hong led Jian Wushuang to a secret chamber. "Young Pavilion Master, you came to this cultivation room for cultivation 4 years ago, and you are familiar with the environment inside. Don't force yourself. If you cannot carry on, you should come out as soon as possible." Elder Hong warned him patiently. "I know." Jian Wushuang nodded and then stepped into the secret chamber. There was no decoration in this simple secret chamber. When Jian Wushuang entered the secret chamber, he felt a terrible force rushing toward him and oppressing him. He felt like he was mired down in mud, and it was very difficult to make any gestures or movements. This force was the unique pressure of the human-level cultivation room. It was tyrannical. Under this force, every movement in the secret chamber became extremely difficult. Even if a person wanted to stand, he had to rely on spiritual power to resist it. In this way, the speed of spiritual power consumption would be quite alarming. In general, if a common warrior in the first step of the spirit path merely stood in the human-level cultivation room, his spiritual power would run out in no more than 8 minutes. If he practiced swordsmanship in this room, the speed of spiritual power consumption would be incredible. "Let me start." Jian Wushuang's face held no expression, and the long sword on his back was unsheathed. Chapter 6, Jian Lin. Clang. The sword light flashed around with unpredictable changes in speed. The light would dim and brighten at random moments. Sometimes the whole energy was focused on one point, while sometimes it was separated in every ray of the sword light. This was one of the Sword Marquee Mansion's first-class sword arts. It was called Bright Moon Sword Art. In the human-level cultivation room, Jian Wushuang began to practice swordsmanship, but under the effect of its tyrannical gravity, the spiritual power within his body was consumed at an unbelievable speed. In a mere moment, before he even practiced the whole Bright Moon Sword Art, he found his spiritual power had already drained out. Without hesitation, Jian Wushuang promptly sheathed his long sword and trudged to a corner at the right side of this secret chamber. There existed a yellowish cattail hassock. It was made for people to regain their spiritual power with no interruption from the unique gravity. Sitting on the cattail hassock, Jian Wushuang started to use heavenly creation skill, and a flow of spiritual power came to him from all directions, aggregating in his dantian through his 8 extra meridians at a ridiculous speed. After 10 minutes, Jian Wushuang stood up again. His overall spiritual power had reached the peak, even stronger than before. Just as I thought, the speed of the heavenly creation skill to absorb the spiritual power of heaven and earth is far faster than that of ordinary cultivation means. Certainly, the speed of regaining spiritual power is quick. That's true, because when the spiritual power is used up, a common warrior cannot reach the peak unless he spends several hours recovering. I only need 10 minutes, Jian Wushuang's eyes sparkled with joy. This was another impressive strength of heavenly creation skill compared with other means. The speed of cultivation was fast, as was the speed of restoring spiritual power. And this recovery speed in the human-level cultivation room was almost the same as a cheating device during cultivation. It should be known that the process of exhausting spiritual power and then fully recovering it was very helpful to cultivation. Performing a complete cycle would allow even an ordinary warrior to improve his spiritual power considerably each time he did this. Jian Wushuang cultivated a heaven-defying cultivation method. Therefore, his improvement in spiritual power would be higher. As soon as he recovered to the peak, he immediately noticed that his spiritual power had improved a lot. This was the advantage of cultivating in the human-level cultivation room. For ordinary warriors, their speed of regaining spiritual power was too slow, so it was not effective for them to complete any more than 2 cycles a day at most. Besides, it was depressing and intolerable to cultivate in this room. Normally, very few disciples would choose to cultivate here. Occasionally, some disciples who couldn't break through a bottleneck would come here, and try to forcibly break through using the gravity in this room. Just as Jian Wushuang had cultivated in this human-level cultivation room once 4 years ago when he couldn't gather his spiritual power. The heavenly creation skill that I cultivate makes my speed of regaining spiritual power unimaginable. Others can only finish the cultivation cycle twice a day, while I can finish 20 times a day at least. That means that my cultivation will be at least 10 times the speed of ordinary warriors. Heavenly creation skill's cultivation speed was fast enough. Besides, with the help of the human-level cultivation room, his cultivation speed would be so fast that he could enter the second heaven of the divine path within 1 or 2 days. I took 4 years longer than others to become a warrior, so I must work harder than common people so that I won't be left behind anymore. A keen light burst out from Jian Wushuang's eyes. From then on, he became fully immersed in cultivating in the human-level cultivation room. The cultivation cycle began with him completely exhausting the spiritual power and ended after recovering it to its peak. Each cycle helped him improve his spiritual power further. What's more, he could finish dozens of cultivation cycles almost every day. The cultivation speed was also 10 times faster than ordinary warriors, possibly even more. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. In front of the gate of Sword Pavilion. Bang! With the sound of a deep crash, a Sword Pavilion disciple was relentlessly thrown into the sky. He fell heavily to the ground. Ha! Sword Pavilion disciples are so weak. The laughter came from a purple-robed youth. He was obviously not a disciple from Sword Pavilion, yet he stood domineeringly in front of the gate of Sword Pavilion. Hearing his words, many disciples around him were resentful but couldn't do anything. There is nothing great about reaching the 6th step earlier than me and having stronger spiritual power than me. The defeated disciple stood up and spoke indignantly. It's a fact that you have been defeated, you still don't want to accept it? Are disciples from Sword Pavilion all like you? The youth completely ignored the homicidal stare with a sneer. What? He turned his gaze, seeing Jian Wushuang walking towards Sword Pavilion, and then gave him a wicked smile. As usual, Jian Wushuang had come to cultivate in Sword Pavilion. However, as he came to the door of Sword Pavilion. Is that the young pavilion master, Jian Wushuang? A mocking voice came all of a sudden. Jian Wushuang stopped and saw the purple-robed youth with slightly closed eyes. He had a slight impression of this youth. He knew his name was Jian Lin, and that he was an excellent disciple of Red Martial Hall. More importantly, he knew Jian Lin had a crush on Jian Meng'er and tried to please her all the time. But unfortunately, Jian Meng'er had been with Jian Wushuang for 4 years so as to study the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion. This made Jian Lin hate Jian Wushuang very much out of jealousy. Jian Lin had never had a chance to fight with Jian Wushuang on account of Jian Lan and Jian Meng'er. With a sword in hand, no one is his match. The name is good, but you don't deserve it, Jian Lin sneered at Jian Wushuang without any scruple. Besides, you even want to gain Meng'er's love. It's like a toad trying to eat swan meat. You should look at yourself. Why would Meng'er love trash who can't even cultivate spiritual power? Jian Wushuang glanced at Jian Lin. Instead of getting angry, he laughed ironically and said, "You're right, people like me don't deserve Jian Meng'er. I'll give her to you." "Give her to me." Jian Lin was puzzled at first, and then became rampant. "Damn it, you think I need trash like you to give her to me?" Jian Wushuang laughed coldly. Without another word he walked back towards Sword Pavilion. "Trash, stop right there!" Jian Lin roared. Jian Wushuang ignored him and continued walking. "Bastard, how dare you ignore me?" Jian Lin scolded. His face was distorted. He moved his body and a palm struck toward Jian Wushuang's back. Noticing the wind behind his back, Jian Wushuang suddenly turned back with cold eyes. His right hand punched out powerfully and vigorously as spiritual power instantly burst out from him. "Get out of my way!" As Jian Wushuang roared, the voice lashed out along with the strength of his arm. Jian Wushuang's fist crashed into Jian Lin's palm. Bang! Jian Wushuang stumbled back a few steps, while Jian Lin was also forced to take a step back. Though he was pushed only one step back, Jian Lin was completely shocked. "How come?" Jian Lin glared at Jian Wushuang with bulging eyes. He hadn't dared to hit too hard, so the palm hadn't contained too much power. But even so, an ordinary person wouldn't be able to bear it easily, while Jian Wushuang had even forced him to retreat. The third step. He's reached at least the third step of the spirit path, or even the peak of the third step. Jian Lin said with horror. Chapter 7, Wishful Thinking? In front of the sword pavilion, in addition to Jian Wushuang and Jian Lin, there were a large number of sword pavilion disciples. They all saw what happened and felt confused. He forced Jian Lin back. How could this be? Peak of the sixth step of the spirit path. Jian Lin is at the peak of the sixth step of the spirit path. Even though he didn't use all his strength, no ordinary person could take it. Not to mention Jian Lin was forced back. The third step, his cultivation is at the third step of the spirit path. Has Jian Wushuang gathered spiritual power and become a warrior? Is his cultivation at the third step of the spirit path? It was shocking. All the sword pavilion disciples were amazed. Just 10 days ago, Jian Wushuang had not gathered any spiritual power. But now, after only 10 days had passed, he had not only gathered spiritual power, but also cultivated to the third step of the spirit path. In 10 days, he had gone from becoming a warrior to reaching the third step of the spirit path after continuous breakthroughs. What did that mean? They did not know that Jian Wushuang cultivated heavenly creation skill and couldn't be thought of as an ordinary person. He had a heaven-defying cultivation method. 10 days ago, although he had just gathered the spiritual power, his cultivation speed with heavenly creation skill was faster than ordinary people. What's more, he had done frantic and desperate cultivation in the human-level cultivation room, where 1 day's cultivation for Jian Wushuang was worth dozens of days of cultivation for ordinary people. After 10 days, he had had a direct breakthrough from the first heaven of the divine path to the third heaven of the divine path. Of course, he had just had the breakthrough and only reached the third heaven. The reason Jian Lin thought he had reached the peak of the third step of spirit path was that he cultivated heavenly creation skill. So his strength was significantly more than other warriors at the same level. Kid, I admit that I underestimated you. I did not expect that you could gather spiritual power. But it doesn't matter with only the third step of the spirit path. In front of me, you are still trash. Jian Lin stared at Jian Wushuang. The spiritual power welling up from his palms showed that he was going all out. Jian Wushuang narrowed his eyes. No matter what, he could not withstand an attack from someone who cultivated to the peak of the sixth step of the spirit path now. At this moment. What are you doing? There was a low growl, then Elder Hong in his grey robe came out from Sword Pavilion. Elder Hong. Several Sword Pavilion disciples respectfully saluted at once. Seeing the elder, Jian Lin immediately stopped and changed his look. The formidable spiritual power welling up from him was drawn back. At the same time, he saluted, Elder Hong. Elder Hong glanced at Jian Lin, and snorted, You are Jian Lin, huh? With cultivation at the peak of the sixth step of the spirit path, you are pretty good among disciples at the same level. Relying on a slightly deeper cultivation, you are showing off your strength in front of the Sword Pavilion. Do you really think there is no one who can deal with you in Sword Pavilion? I dare not. Jian Lin quickly shook his head, with cold sweat falling down instantly. He pretty much knew that, even if the position of Sword Pavilion had declined markedly in the Sword Marquee Mansion, the 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion, all of whom were at the spiritual sea realm, were the backbone of the mansion. Especially Elder Hong, his strength was absolutely in the top 3 in the current Sword Marquee Mansion. Facing such a strong man, even though he was conceited, he dared not be rude. "Get out of here now," Elder Hong scolded. "Okay," Jian Lin replied immediately. But as he was leaving, he glanced at Jian Wushuang and said with a sneer, "Jian Wushuang, I heard that you went to find Meng the day she was appointed as the new Sword Pavilion Master, and boldly threw down a personal challenge for the annual Sword Marquee token battle in 2 months. All those around were puzzled at first. This was the first time they were hearing this. They looked at Jian Wushuang. 2 months later, Jian Wushuang would challenge Jian Meng. Was this a joke? There are many folks in this world who are foolish and arrogant. But I have never met such a foolish and arrogant person as you. With just the 3rd step of the spirit path, you are actually thinking of defeating Meng who is in the profound spiritual sea realm. Haha, my laughter is killing me." Jian Lin left. But his unscrupulous laughter echoed in front of the sword pavilion. Jian Wushuang just stood there, with an apathetic expression. Many people gazed at him with regret in their eyes. Some eyes were even filled with ridicule and disdain, just like Jian Lin's. Even Elder Hong was looking at Jian Wushuang with a quiet complex expression. In 2 months he is challenging Jian Meng. Was Jian Wushuang going to rely on his cultivation at the 3rd step of the spirit path? All the Sword Pavilion disciples thought that was just wishful thinking for Jian Wushuang. After Jian Lin left, Elder Hong winked at Jian Wushuang. Immediately they went inside the hall of Sword Pavilion. "Young Pavilion Master, congratulations. You have finally become a real warrior after 4 years' endeavor," Elder Hong smiled. He had seen everything that had occurred outside the Sword Pavilion just now and had surely seen Jian Lin get knocked back by Jian Wushuang. "Ah, but it is not enough just to be a warrior," Jian Wushuang said in a downcast voice. Elder Hong looked at Jian Wushuang seriously and asked, "Young Pavilion Master, do you really want to fight with Jian Meng at the Sword Marquee token battle?" "Yes, this competition is inevitable," Jian Wushuang said firmly. Elder Hong thought it was impossible. "Young Master of the Pavilion, you should know that during a warrior's cultivation, the breakthrough of each level is much harder. It will also take a very long time. Only 2 months. As far as I know, in the whole Sword Marquee Mansion, the only one who ever made such great progress in 2 months was the Pavilion Master, your father. When the Pavilion Master was young, in 2 months he reached the 6th step of the Spirit Path from the 2nd step of the Spirit Path. He had a direct breakthrough of 4 levels, which greatly defied the natural order. The reason the Pavilion Master had such a breakthrough was that, first of all, he had a great gift for cultivation, together with the support of a large number of pills from the Sword Marquee Mansion. The most important thing was that the Pavilion Master spent those 2 months in the gladiator arena and participated in combat with opponents almost every day. Only because of struggling with life and death in the arena, could he progress so fast. However, the Pavilion Master only had a breakthrough from the 2nd step of the Spirit Path to the 6th step of the Spirit Path. Elder Hong stared at Jian Wushuang. But that could not sway him from his decision, not even a little. Of course, he understood what Elder Hong said. It had taken his father 2 months to break through the 2nd step of the Spirit Path and reach the 6th step of the Spirit Path, which was incredible. However, what he was going to do was much harder. Jian Meng is already at the profound spiritual sea realm. I need to reach at least the level of the 7th heaven of the divine path. Then by virtue of heavenly creation skill and my swordsmanship, as well as the soul-devouring secret skill, it is possible for me to defeat her. And from the 3rd heaven of the divine path to the 7th heaven of the divine path, it is same in that they both need to break through 4 levels. But it is at least 10 times harder than that from the 2nd step of the spirit path to the 6th step of the spirit path. But I am a defiant cultivator. Every step I take will be out of the ordinary and in defiance of the natural order. Other people cannot do it. But for me, it is possible. Jian Wushuang had made up his mind. His eyes became more determined. Seeing this, Elder Hong asked, "Do you really want to try?" "Of course. But I will not just try, I will defeat her in 2 months. Jian Wushuang's eyes were grim. "In that case, I will not say anything more. But I have something that may be able to help you." Elder Hong took out a jade box from his bosom and then opened it. Inside the jade box were 2 milk-white pills. Chapter 8, First Class Spirit Cultivating Pill. Spirit Cultivating Pill. Jian Wushuang was momentarily surprised but immediately shook his head. "That doesn't seem right. The fragrance is too strong. It can't be an ordinary pill. Could it be a first-class pill?" Spirit cultivating pills were taken exclusively by warriors in the spirit path realm. It would greatly aid the cultivation of warriors of that level. However, there were 2 kinds of spirit cultivating pills. The first-class pills were 10 times rarer and more effective than ordinary pills. Furthermore, it had nearly no impurities, so a warrior could use it without any worries. A first-class spirit cultivating pill was a precious treasure. Not even hundreds of ordinary pills could match up to a first-class pill in market value. There were many alchemists in the pill refining room of the Sword Marquis mansion, but none managed to produce a first-class pill. That was why there were none in the mansion. If there was truly a need for it, the mansion could only purchase it from the gladiator arena. Jian Wushuang didn't expect Elder Hong to have 1 first-class spirit cultivating pill, let alone a whopping 2. "I paid a considerable price to buy these 2 first-class spirit cultivating pills from the gladiator arena. I was planning on finding a good disciple and giving him these pills. I didn't think the Sword Pavilion would be hit by such a big crisis before I could even find one. So I'll hand these 2 pills to you, young master. I hope they'll be useful to you," Elder Hong said, smiling. "Elder Hong," Jian Wushuang looked at Elder Hong but didn't stretch out his hands to accept the pills. "A first-class spirit cultivating pill is extremely potent. A warrior in the spirit path realm typically needs a month to absorb the pill completely, and now you have 2. That's enough time for you to fully absorb these 2 pills. I believe it'll greatly help your cultivation. Just take them," Elder Hong said. "Thank you so much." Jian Wushuang nodded, accepting the jade box without putting up a show of pretense. "Elder Hong, rest assured the Sword Pavilion won't collapse while I'm still alive. In 2 months, I'll properly defeat Jian Menger of the Red Martial Hall before everyone in the Sword Marquis token battle. I'll let everyone know that the only one who could be the Sword Pavilion master is a disciple of the Sword Pavilion." When he was done talking, Jian Wushuang turned and stepped into a cultivating room once again. Only this time he entered the earth-level cultivating room, one of the 3 big cultivating rooms in the Sword Pavilion. Elder Hong remained rooted on the ground, watching as Jian Wushuang walked into the cultivating room. A trace of a smile gradually appeared on his face. Young master's temperament is really similar to the master's. Stubborn. Yes. Pavilion master was just as stubborn. But to defeat Jian Menger in just 2 months, that's not just difficult but nearly impossible. Elder Hong shook his head. On the same day Jian Menger was appointed as the Sword Pavilion master, he personally had a fight with her. He realized she had unusual strength despite her young age. Having reached the exceptional spiritual sea realm long ago, it would be nearly impossible for a warrior with the usual profound spiritual sea realm to continue a fight against him for 20 movements. Yet Jian Menger succeeded. "I really hope our young master will manage a miracle in 2 months. It's a joyful occasion that he has condensed spiritual power to be a warrior. I need to let that person in the Golden Dragon Palace know." The enormous pressure of the earth-level cultivating room was far greater than that of the human-level cultivation room. Inside the room, the spiritual power within Jian Wushuang's body was consumed even more quickly. Yet he continued practicing his ethereal and fluid swordsmanship with his shadow mirroring his actions. The swordsmanship he used was the blue cloud sword art, one of many top mysterious arts from the Sword Pavilion. Jian Wushuang had once performed all the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion at the profound level, causing everyone in Sword Marquee Mansion to marvel at her talent in sword principles. They were so busy admiring her that they had forgotten that it was he, Jian Wushuang, who imparted each of those sword arts to her. He was the true genius of sword principles. Now, Jian Wushuang was recognized as the #1 sword principle talent by the whole Sword Marquee Mansion. But even she understood clearly that he was countless times more gifted in sword principles than she was. Take the Blue Cloud sword art for example. He had truly pushed it to great heights, whereas her performance was just like a little kid's trick. His swordsmanship practice sped up the consumption of his spiritual power, but he was prepared and had already swallowed a first-class spirit-cultivating pill earlier. The elixir was incredibly potent. After taking one, the typical warrior would need a month or more to absorb its effects completely. Jian Wushuang, with the help of heavenly creation skill, already felt the pill flowing quickly throughout his body. In just a night, he had completely absorbed the benefits of the first-class spirit-cultivating pill. That allowed him to make a direct breakthrough to the fourth heaven of the divine path. The fourth heaven of the divine path. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists, feeling the booming power within him. He had just broken through the third heaven of the divine path yesterday and made another breakthrough today. It was thanks to the potency of the first-class spirit-cultivating pill as well as the wonders of the heavenly creation skill. The pill that others needed a month or longer to absorb, he had absorbed within the span of one night. The heavenly creation skill is really magical. With the heavenly creation skill, I actually needed just a day to absorb the great effects of the first-class spirit-cultivating pill. If I have more, then, his eyes gleamed red as he thought about this. I want those first-class spirit-cultivating pills. The more, the better. Jian Wushuang's heart was burning with these thoughts. The first-class spirit-cultivating pill, capable of being absorbed in a short time, greatly improved his cultivation. Of course, he thirsted for more. What a pity that those pills weren't so easy to obtain. Not even the Sword Marquee Mansion is capable of producing these pills. Perhaps only the Gladiator Arena is capable of mass-producing them in Bashui Prefecture, Jian Wushuang muttered to himself. The Gladiator Arena was a giant chamber of commerce and enjoyed a high status in Bashui Prefecture. If the Sword Marquee Mansion needed ingredients or even pills in bulk, they would certainly purchase those things from the Gladiator Arena. Meanwhile, what attracted people the most about the Gladiator Arena were its duels and life-and-death battles. Jian Wushuang's father, for example, experienced many battles in the Gladiator Arena over the span of 2 months and made great progress in that time. These pills are so expensive that they're beyond my means at the moment. If that's the case, I only have one other way. No matter what happens, I need to give it a go, Jian Wushuang said firmly, staring at the only first-class spirit-cultivating pill left in his palm. Madness and desire colored his expression. A duel. The reason why duels at the Gladiator Arena drew so much attention was the existence of duels leading to fighting and slaughtering between warriors. Chapter 9, Gladiator Arena. Although Bashui Prefecture was just one of the 108 prefectures in Tianyang Province, its territory was still vast. The Sword Marquee Mansion was publicly recognized as the strongest force within Bashui Prefecture. But there was, in fact, another stronger force. However, this force had been keeping a low profile and never engaged in fights. Thus, the title of the strongest force was given to the Sword Marquee Mansion. That transcendent force was none other than the Gladiator Arena. The royals of Tianzong dynasty were said to be behind the Gladiator Arena. The arena, which was actually the strongest force, was present in every province and county of the Tianzong dynasty. In Bashui Prefecture, the Gladiator Arena was located in its very center. A masked figure wearing white robes and carrying a long sword ambled into the Gladiator Arena. An attendant welcomed him and said, "Your Excellency, what can we do for you?" "I want a duel," Jian Wushuang replied. Duel. The attendant lifted his brows without any surprise. The gladiator arena ran a variety of events, among which duels were the most common event. Please tell me your name and cultivation level, the attendant said. Call me Nan. As for my cultivation level, with a flick of his wrist, a jet of spiritual power burst out from Jian Wushuang. The fourth step of the spirit path. The attendant smiled faintly. There were innumerable warriors coming for duels in this place. Warriors in the transforming sea realm or even in gold core realm had participated. Warriors at Jian Wushuang's level were all too common. What do you want to bet, Mr. Nan? The attendant asked. This. Jian Wushuang took out the wooden box and opened it. Spirit cultivating pill. The attendant recognized the item at a glance but didn't think much of it. A few seconds later, his expression immediately changed. This is a first-class spirit cultivating pill. Mr. Nan, let's talk in another place. Follow me, the attendant said, lowering his voice. Jian Wushuang put away his wooden box and nodded. He followed the attendant into a secret chamber where another servant was waiting. The servant was dressed in black robes, clearly having a higher status in this arena. Mr. Nan, our arena is operated in every city of Tianzong dynasty and our rules are well known. I believe you're also aware of it, the black-robed servant said, looking at Jian Wushuang. I understand. When you take part in a life-or-death duel, your victory and life is your responsibility. Jian Wushuang nodded. In that case, I'll arrange a suitable opponent for you as soon as possible. As for that first-class spirit cultivating pill, please hand it to me now. The black-robed servant looked at Jian Wushuang. Sure. Jian Wushuang was already aware of the criteria and he didn't hesitate to hand the pill over. May I know how many first-class spirit cultivating pills I get if I win? It's always 1-to-1 in our arena. If you bet one pill, then naturally you'll only win one. Of course, you can keep dueling if you're confident, the black-robed servant said. 1-to-1. Jian Wushuang frowned and shook his head. That's too slow. I don't have the time to duel this way. Do you have other special duels that would allow me to win more first-class spirit cultivating pills in one go? Special duels? Yes, we do. The black-robed servant nodded. If you want to win more pills, there's only one way. That's the rank-skipping challenge. The servant's smile never faltered. A victory in the rank-skipping challenge pays tenfold. In other words, you'll get 10 pills if you win. But it's not an easy challenge. 99% of our challengers don't succeed and most of them end up dead. The rank-skipping challenge. Jian Wushuang's expression darkened. Being in the fourth heaven of the divine path, he needed to fight with warriors in the fifth step of the spirit path who wanted to have a duel in the arena. Although I'm only in the fourth heaven, my heavenly creation skill is stronger than my peers. My spiritual power is also strong enough to rival the common warrior in the fourth step of the spirit path. There's still a big gap compared with the fifth step, but I have an advantage in martial arts technique. Jian Wushuang had absolute confidence in his own swordsmanship. My swordsmanship should be enough to compensate for the gap in spiritual power. Besides, I also have my trump card. Jian Wushuang's eyes gleamed, having made his decision. All right, I'll take the rank-skipping challenge. Please arrange it for me. A middle-aged man dressed in a loose purple robe entered the gladiator arena. Supervisor. Greetings, Supervisor. Whenever the servants passed by the middle-aged man, they paid their respects with humility. Are there any particularly interesting duels going on? The man asked a servant. Sir, you came right on time. We'll have a unique life and deal duel very soon. One warrior is at the fifth realm of the spirit path, but the other is at the fourth realm. His breakthrough seems pretty recent too, the servant replied. Oh, a rank-skipping challenge. The purple-robed man raised an eyebrow and nodded as if he was intrigued. I'll go and check it out. Large amounts of spectators crowded around a bluestone arena in the heart of this vast place, all intrigued by the rank-skipping challenge. The purple-robed man found a seat amid the crowd at random, staring at the bluestone arena. With so many spectators around, the atmosphere at the bluestone arena was a chaotic cauldron of noise. The crowd raised an uproar when they saw a dark-skinned man with messy hair stepping onto the arena. Spear Devil! Spear Devil! Many spectators cheered and howled, filling the whole arena. The man stood in the arena with his long spear, his brass bell-like eyes sweeping the crowd. He suddenly grinned, revealing a set of white teeth and an expression teeming with ferocity. Spear Devil was considered an expert in the gladiator arena. In the fifth step of the spirit path, he had killed 2 same-level warriors in life-and-death battles using extremely brutal tactics. Due to the excellent use of his spear, he was nicknamed as such. On the other side of the arena, a masked Jian Wushuang was quietly standing with his long sword. His exposed eyes were fixed on his brutish opponent, keenly feeling the pressure coming from him. Jian Wushuang appeared grim. He knew his opponent was not merely a warrior in the fifth step of the spirit path. The fact that he could win 2 duels in this insane arena meant his strength was far greater. He really didn't want to fight with Spear Devil, much less in a life-and-death battle, if he didn't have to. But he simply had no choice. After all, time wasn't on his side. His unique identity was easily identifiable through his sword arts from the Sword Marquee Mansion. He couldn't participate in duel after duel in this arena at all. That left him only one choice, risking his life to take the rank-skipping challenge and try and win all the first-class spirit-cultivating pills he needed in one go. I've never heard of you, masked kid. It's probably your first time fighting in the gladiator arena. But you're really unlucky to meet me. Spear Devil stared coldly at Jian Wushuang as if he was a predator gazing at its prey. Chapter 10, Spear Devil. Translator, Transneditor, Transn. There were all sorts of people in the gladiator arena, including those who masked their identities like Jian Wushuang. Thus no one found him out of place. Enough talk. Let's fight. Jian Wushuang's voice was cold. The minute he finished his sentence, his spiritual power was already rising. The fourth step of the spirit path. Spear Devil was stunned and his face turned red with anger. You dare underestimate me? Spear Devil considered himself very tough after consecutively defeating 2 same-level warriors. But now, his opponent was just a warrior of the fourth step of the spirit path. When he considered this, he burst into a rage all of a sudden. Go to hell! His long spear pierced the air like a dragon, causing a shrill sonic boom and appearing in front of Jian Wushuang in the next moment. Spear Devil had also closed the gap of 10 meters between him and his opponent at the same time. How fast? Jian Wushuang was startled, but his own actions didn't slow. Swoosh! He drew his long sword out of the sheath, instantly producing a sword shadow that was too fast to catch. He swiped at his opponent as his spiritual power came bursting forth and pushed his strength to its peak. Clang! The sword and spear clashed with a crisp clanging sound. Jian Wushuang twisted his wrist, inclining his long sword forward. With a ghostly jumping movement, the sword crossed the body of the spear and sliced towards Spear Devil's hands. This sword art! In his shock, Spear Devil's disdain for his opponent vanished at once. Though it was just a simple sword movement, he realized that Jian Wushuang possessed marvelous swordsmanship. Get out, he thundered, forcefully swinging down his arms holding the long spear. His fearsome strength instantly repelled Jian Wushuang's attack. He turned around, wanting to launch a counter-offensive. Whether it's your spear or figure, they are too clumsy. Come up and be my target. Jian Wushuang's voice came to his ears, followed by his ethereal sword shadow one after another. Fast. He was too fast. It was so fast that it seemed impossible to have come out of a warrior in the fourth step of the spirit path. In addition, Jian Wushuang's swordplay also continually interrupted and gave Spear Devil no room to fight back. What great swordsmanship! Fearsome! This swordsmanship! A commotion was raised in the arena, with exclamations rising in succession. The crowd was aware that this battle was a rank-skipping challenge between a warrior of the fourth realm of the spirit path and a warrior of the fifth step of the spirit path. Typically, there was no surprise to such battles. After all, there was such a big disparity between the fourth step and the fifth step. However, everyone was astounded the minute the two started fighting. Spear Devil, who was in the fifth step of the spirit path, was actually completely suppressed by the masked warrior in the fourth step of the spirit path. Interesting. The middle-aged man in loose purple robe smiled when he saw the scene unfolding in the arena. The masked warrior ought to be a young man, but he has truly great swordsmanship. If I'm not mistaken, his sword art ought to be the fallen leaf sword art of the sword pavilion. It's just a general first-class sword art, but he has an excellent command of it and is capable of pushing it to great heights. His every move is clean without any unnecessary embellishment. This shows he has a great understanding of the sword art and a solid foundation. His talent in sword principles is extraordinary because he possesses such swordsmanship while so young. On the other hand, the way the man called Spear Devil used his spear is far inferior. If not for his stronger spiritual power, he would have lost at the very beginning. The middle-aged man in the loose purple robe was the supervisor of the gladiator arena and enjoyed foresight as great as his status. With just a glance, he managed to grasp the greatness of Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship as well as his talent in sword principles. The man wasn't wrong. Jian Wushuang had truly remarkable swordsmanship. He wouldn't have taken the rank-skipping challenge if he wasn't confident. On the arena, the battle was overwhelmingly in favor of one person. How can this be? How can his sword be so fast? I'm in the fifth step of the spirit path, but I can't even catch up to his speed. Spear Devil was aghast but quickly became agitated. Ah! Spear Devil growled, raging flames of anger burning in his eyes. He completely exploded in the next moment. Boom! The shrill sonic boom once again rang throughout the arena. Disregarding Jian Wushuang slashing at him, he immediately showed his strongest killing move, which had terrifying lethality. Look! Spear Devil is using his ultimate move. It's the 13 styles of cloud-piercing spear. Someone was yelling below the arena. The 13 styles of cloud-piercing spear was a continuous attack, with each fiercer and stronger than the one before it. It was the unique move that propelled Spear Devil to fame. The power was so fearsome that even Jian Wushuang couldn't help feeling nervous. He promptly used his long sword to resist the continuous and fierce spear attacks. Clang! 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 His arms felt numb after blocking 12 spear attacks in a single breath. In the meantime, Spear Devil had accumulated his power and pushed it to an ultimate level, demonstrating the strongest and most terrifying 13th spear attack. Die! Spear Devil cried, face twisting with ferocity. Go to hell! Killing intent flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. Whoosh! The ice-cold sword shadow flashed before disappearing at once. The shadow was unimaginably fast, indescribably so. Vivid red spattered into the air. Spear Devil's ferocious smile remained etched on his face, but his eyes were filled with resentment and unwillingness. If one looked carefully, one could see a distinct sword wound on the vital part of his throat. Spear Devil, a warrior of the fifth realm of the spirit path who had won 2 life and death battles in succession, was killed. Jian Wushuang stood by Spear Devil's corpse, panting heavily. What a close call! They're indeed warriors who slaughter in the gladiator arena. Insanity is etched in their bones. He actually chose to fight life for life after being suppressed by my swordsmanship. I can't match up to his insanity. Fortunately, I had my trump card or it would have been my death today. Jian Wushuang sighed. Below the arena, everyone was stunned and shocked. Countless spectators were holding their breaths, watching the arena in disbelief. No one expected Spear Devil, a powerful warrior who had won 2 battles in succession, to die at the hands of a warrior in the 4th step of the spirit path. The rank-skipping challenge was actually a success. Within the audience, the middle-aged man in loose purple robe finally had a change in expression. Earlier he had seemed merely interested, but now he was looking grave. "The sword art you used earlier. Is it the anonymous sword art?"